Thank you guys so much. It's such a beautiful film, and I know everybody shares that sentiment. Ambassador Power, I'd like to start with you. You've seen the film now too, and it's incredibly intimate, and you allow Greg such access, all of you do. What convinced you that that was the right thing to do?
I had the CIA do a deep background check, particularly into his heart and his soul, and it came back, you know, on the positive side of the ledger. No, I had worked together with Greg in the past. He did a movie about Sergio Vieira de Mello, who was a great sort of James Bond, UN peacemaker around the world that I recommend to everybody, that HBO did. And just the tenderness with which he treats all of his subject matters is like nothing that I've encountered. And the hard thing was, we live in a world of, or when I was in the government, there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of skepticism and not a huge amount of trust in a lot of different directions. And so it took some time to bring everybody else on board. But one of the things that Ben, who's such an amazing character in the film, an amazing person, said to us recently was just that when he thinks about how he spent his time in government, you know, the press conferences, the kinds of things that are depicted there, they're like popcorn, you know, they're so fleeting, and something like this is so lasting and about so much more than the Obama administration or diplomacy. So it was well worth it, and thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
And a question for both of you, really. But Greg, for you, when you started making this film, and if it took a while to work through, to convince everyone to be part of it, sounds like it was going to be a very different kind of project. It was about the legacy, about the final few years. How did the project shift as you started to see what was happening with the election?
I think, honestly, whenever you begin a project like this, we really didn't know how it was going to turn out because, you know, historically, eventful things tend to happen in the last year of presidencies. You know, I think like a lot of us, I sort of thought it was likely Hillary Clinton was going to win, so I thought, you know, maybe there'd be some big diplomatic pushes at the end of the year, and yeah, I didn't know. I just thought that there would be something that was going to happen. I mean, obviously the election results took all of us by surprise, and I sort of kept that feeling, that spirit kind of in the film, because I think that's kind of what happened. So, you know, things always shift with a film like this. So you never, for me, I just did not go in thinking it's going to be like this. I knew that they, you know, they wanted to, and Ben was up front, they were looking at defining their legacy going into their last year. So I knew that that would be the core of it and the debate about that legacy. But there are other stuff happening as well. I just figured, you know, we'd see what was going to happen.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the Greg's impulse to show this, you and I talked about this off stage, but to show what public servants are doing and the pace at which they're working and the kind of grind and the just almost like a tapestry of scenes of lives, and so that we're not just these wooden people, and frankly not just the sum of the good or bad policies that come out of our machinery, right? We're just like everybody else, juggling and challenged by interpersonal dynamics within the institution, challenged by events that happen outside, and surprised also by some of the forces, the darker forces that have taken center stage of late. And so I think he always wanted to show the humanity in a way of what people were reading about in the newspaper, and we just hadn't expected that the humanity would take a turn for the worse. Somebody likened watching the film, I don't know if you all felt this way, but to watching a horror movie where everybody in the audience knows how it's going to end, and that, you know, and these innocent characters walking into the room where the axe murderer is, you know. So I don't know if that was your experience of it, but plausible.
So, Ambassador Power, you're, for me, and I'm sure lots of people share this, you're the heart of the film, in part too because you open your life personally, and we see you with your family, we see what you have to juggle to do what you do. Was that always something that Greg talked to you about building into the story he was telling? I
don't know that we ever talked about it as such. It just, to me, there was no other way. That was my life as UN ambassador. When I went for my confirmation hearing, because I had been a journalist and a critic of foreign policy before, so I had this quite grueling, bruising confirmation hearing going before the U.S. Senate. And at the end of my hearing, this is back in 2013, when I just had survived it, it was this great miracle. My son Declan, who you see in the film, who's actually here with me in London, we just had the Harry Potter tour this morning, but Declan jumped into my arms like in front of the Senate and everything, which was, had I been more Machiavellian, was exactly what I needed to get confirmed. But he, it hadn't dawned on me, he just jumped spontaneously into my arms. And then a scrum of photographers came and started snapping all these photographs of me and Declan. And then in the Washington Post the next day, there was this photograph of me like in front of the Senate with the nameplate and everything in this very sober setting with this joyful redhead in my arms. And I got all these letters from women saying, this is so incredible that you're doing this, that you're a cabinet member and a member of the National Security Council with these young children, and you're showing, I'm like, oh God, I didn't self-identify as such, you're just doing your thing. But from that point, I mean, that was very instructive to me, and so as ambassador generally, I never tried to compartmentalize. I couldn't afford to. I mean, I would have seen even less of them had I kept them away from UN events. So, you know, I talked to, when I was reading, you saw me reading with him, he was reading Harry Potter, but I taught them about the other ambassadors to the UN by using actually the British Mr. Men series. So there's like Mr. Nosy, Mr. Greedy, Mr. Chatterbox. So like merging the lives in all ways. So that meant transparency, and hopefully maybe that would inspire some people, and even the inelegance of, so much inelegance of what Greg got to see, that's what it's like. Like, it's not Sheryl Sandberg, you know, like where it all looks very sort of doable from the outside. It's a real struggle. And so I thought the fact that Greg would see that, and trusting Greg that he would, again, not exploit all that he saw, but give people an insight into what that juggle is like.
Yeah, I really wanted to convey the humanity and just the relentless nature of these jobs, both for you and for the staff as well. And a number of your staff were telling me how sort of inspired and amazed they were by how you integrated work and family, how challenging that was. And it was across the board in government. And I think it's, you know, it actually transcends parties, and putting aside the current administration, you know, people who do these jobs, to take them on, you know, and I'm never sure you ever realize the degree of personal sacrifice that's involved until you're in it. I don't know, because it is so all-consuming as an outsider looking in. And so, you know, sometimes her staff would share your schedule, and it would be like meeting so-and-so, you know, secure meeting, we don't know what that is, and then like soccer, you know, ballet practice. And so, you know, really it was just, so it was very natural to just kind of want to incorporate all of that. But at the heart of it was just trying to show that these are human beings doing these jobs that are kind of extraordinary jobs, and then when they're over, you just go back to civilian life again. But there's this kind of, I think for those of us on the outside don't fully appreciate what it's like to be in there. And it's very easy to kind of, you know, we should criticize the government of, you know, whatever we think, but it's very easy to just quickly pass judgment without trying to fully understand the kind of the humanity involved on the inside. And that's one of the things I took away from this process, was looking at and witnessing the kind of the dedication of not just senior officials, but career people, career civil servants who are just doing this job, often at great personal sacrifice.
This is a very loving portrait, and I really appreciate the film for that, but also, you know, you do explore successes and moments that weren't what the administration wanted. Was that hard for you to see on screen?
Well, I think anything to do with Syria, to see it anywhere at any time on screen in the newspaper, it's hard. I mean, it's not only do we have, but it's a hell of a lot easier for me than it is for people who are from Syria or in Syria. We have, you know, now 66 million displaced globally, of whom, you know, a very significant share are Syrian. Woman for the New York Times just wrote recently about the Syrianization of the world. I mean, there's a real question of, would Brexit have happened but for the mass migration that occurred in part because the countries around Syria were bursting, and then just the sheer suffering. I mean, you can't read about Syria today and not and have had the power and the privilege that we had and not ask yourself, geez, like was there something we could have done at some stage that would have made things better? Because it has destroyed so many lives, innocent lives, and its infective, toxic residue and ongoing suffering, are with us today. I mean, would Trump be elected? But had we somehow, but again, it's also the most complex conflicts. Not something Greg could get into in the film, but I think even in the film you just get a sense of just the number of outside parties involved, and the number of armed groups on the ground and the confusion. So it's hard to pinpoint even in retrospect. I wish I could say if we'd done the following three things, the UK would always be part of the European Union and Hillary Clinton would be our president. I don't know what those three things are, but seeing anything to do with Syria is painful.
And Greg, the flip side of that question for you, I mean, it's obviously a film that's sort of politically sensitive in many ways. Was there a sense that there were certain things you couldn't do or couldn't say when you were making the film?
No, I mean, the biggest challenge was just being in the rooms. I mean, over time we developed a huge amount of trust, and we worked with a very small crew. So, but ultimately, of course, this is a film about foreign policy and, national security issues. So there were, lots of meetings that we just weren't even allowed to know about, let alone be in. So that was always a challenge, because I wanted the film, I think we all felt like we wanted it to be, the scenes to be real. I didn't want like set stage things. So, and yet to kind of be in a real room when things are actually being discussed that are sort of not classified, that was a challenge. So it was always constantly pushing the barriers. Hey, can we do this? Can we do this? Do this? And it was hard. And we didn't always get what we wanted, and they weren't always happy with what we were asking for, and particularly in the White House, and it was a challenge.
Yeah.
But that was, we got enough, I think. So even though it's not an investigative film, but I think tonally, emotionally, it's pretty much how this past year felt.
Yeah.
I was eager to censor one really important thing. I swear a lot, and so...
A lot.
So, but he wouldn't let me censor all of my swear words out. But no, I mean, he used his judgment entirely about what went in and what didn't. But I'm glad some of the footage he has didn't. His artistic judgment was such that hearing my foul-mouthed self was not going to make it something that would allow young people to engage it. And I should say that that's a dream, I think, that we have now for the film, is that, to me, this is not a film about, certainly not a film about Obama. It, of course, is, as it happens, about Obama's final year, our final year. But I don't think it's a film about diplomacy even, though I hope diplomats all around the world, and not just those who are leaving the US government now, get inspired to get back into diplomacy or to join the Foreign Service again when they feel more comfortable and more inspired. But to me, this is just a film about caring about something, anything, and trying. And there's not, you see how trying isn't enough in a lot of cases, but we can't have it any other way. We have to just keep trying. And that's what John Kerry, to me, the most moving scene, I just was backstage and watching the end of it, and to see Secretary Kerry coming out, in front of all those people at the State Department, and his dad was overseas and he grew up abroad, and his entire decades-long career from Vietnam soldier, with shrapnel in himself that he carries around to this day, to somebody who invested so much to peacemaking. There's one scene at the beginning of the film, I think, where he's kind of staggering up the stairs. It's like, he can barely walk. He's just worked so hard. And all of those people there, celebrating, yes, his diplomacy as it happens, but just his trying, his relentless, just would never give up. And that's, I think, given the challenges that we're facing right now, that's the spirit. I think that if it can leave people with that idea of, okay, so this is a crappy time right now, and there are these dark forces that are ascendant, but okay, so what are we going to do about it? What's our little piece of the effort? And what was the thing that we were going to do before last November or before Brexit or whatever? the thing that concerns you most, or at the macro level, is if we were going to do X before, what's the X plus? Like, what's the new thing? How are we stretching ourselves more than we might otherwise have in a spirit of just trying to make things a little bit better?
Speaking of young people, do you want to?
Yeah, but Declan Power,
The real
would you
star
join
of
us
the
on the
film.
stage? He's tall now. That was just last year.
Declan, are you going to audition for the next Harry Potter?
Yeah, Ron Weasley, right here.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for.
Can I just announce
absolutely.
one thing?
Yeah,
So
please.
just today, will be announced this week, but we've secured theatrical distribution in the U.S. and also in the U.K. Around the 20th or so of January, the anniversary of the inauguration. So the alternative story.
Thank you all for being here and for such a generous reaction to the film and to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.